The dust kicked up around Zelda Owens's boots as she made her way down the wooden sidewalk of Springerville, Arizona. Her uneven gait drawing stares and whispers from every direction like she was some kind of spectacle in a traveling show. It was the summer of 1883, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town nestled in the high country, where ponderosa pines dotted the landscape, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. Zelda had learned long ago to keep her eyes forward and her chin up, even when the children pointed and their mothers pulled them away as if her limp were somehow contagious. The accident that had shattered her left leg 3 years ago had healed poorly, leaving her with a permanent reminder that life could change in an instant when a spooked horse reared and a wagon wheel found flesh and bone. She clutched her market basket tighter as she passed the saloon, where a group of ranch hands lounged against the hitching post. Their laughter died down as she approached, replaced by poorly concealed snickers and nudges. Zelda had developed thick skin over the years, but some days the weight of their judgment felt heavier than others. Today was one of those days. She needed thread and fabric from the general store, and no amount of mockery would keep her from completing her errands. Her mother depended on the sewing work they did together to keep food on their table, especially since her father had died 2 winters past from pneumonia that had settled deep in his lungs and refused to let go. The general store sat at the end of the main street, its false front painted a cheerful yellow that seemed out of place among the weathered browns and grays of the other buildings. Zelda climbed the 3 steps to the entrance, her left leg dragging slightly on the last one. She heard the whisper behind her clear as day. Poor thing. What man would ever want damaged goods like that? The words came from Abigail Henderson, the banker's daughter, who had never wanted for anything in her pampered life. Zelda's fingers tightened on the door handle until her knuckles went white, but she pushed through into the cool dimness of the store without looking back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. Inside, the familiar smells of leather and tobacco and coffee beans wrapped around her like a comfort. Mr. Peterson, the store owner, greeted her with the same courteous nod he gave all his customers, and for that small mercy, Zelda was grateful. She moved through the aisles, selecting the items she needed with careful consideration. Every penny counted when you were barely scraping by. She was examining a bolt of calico when the door opened again, letting in a shaft of bright sunlight and a tall figure that seemed to fill the doorway. Zelda glanced up briefly, then returned her attention to the fabric. The newcomer was a cowboy. That much was obvious from his worn leather chaps and the spurs that jingled softly with each step. He had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his days under the open sky, with sun-darkened skin and lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into far distances. "Help you find something, Mr. Lawson," Peterson called from behind the counter. "Just need some tobacco and maybe some of those peppermints if you have them," the cowboy replied. His voice was deep and easy, with a hint of Texas drawl that marked him as someone who had traveled far to reach this corner of Arizona territory. Zelda finished her selection and carried her items to the counter, waiting patiently while Peterson tallied up the cowboy's purchases. She kept her eyes down, studying the grain of the wooden counter as if it held some fascinating secret. It was easier that way to make herself small and unremarkable. "That will be $6.40, Miss Owens," Peterson said when it was her turn. She counted out the coins carefully, sliding them across the counter. As she gathered her purchases, she became aware that the cowboy had not left. He stood near the door, seemingly occupied with lighting a cigarette, but there was something about his stillness that suggested he was waiting for something. Zelda tucked her package under her arm and headed for the exit. The cowboy moved aside to let her pass, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of politeness that surprised her. Most men either ignored her completely or stared with uncomfortable pity. This one did neither. His eyes were gray as morning fog, and they met hers with what seemed like simple respect. "Madam," he said, and that was all. She nodded and stepped out into the afternoon heat. The walk home would take about 20 minutes at her pace, longer if she had to stop and rest her leg, which often ached after too much standing. The Owens house sat on the outskirts of town, a small clapboard structure that had seen better days but still kept the rain out and provided shelter from the cold mountain nights that came even in summer at this elevation. Zelda had made it about halfway down the main street when she heard the voices. A group of young men, probably ranch hands with too much time and too little sense, had gathered near the livery stable. She recognized two of them as regular troublemakers who enjoyed making life difficult for anyone they deemed inferior. "Look at her hobble along like a three-legged dog," one of them called out, loud enough to ensure she heard. "Somebody should put her out of her misery," another added to the guffaws of his companions. Heat flooded Zelda's cheeks, but she kept walking. Engaging with them would only make it worse. She had learned that lesson the hard way more than once. Her leg chose that moment to catch on an uneven board, sending her stumbling. She managed to keep her balance, but her package slipped from her grasp, spilling fabric and thread into the dust. The laughter grew louder and more cruel. Zelda bent to gather her things, blinking back the frustrated tears that threatened to fall. She would not cry in front of them. She would not. "You boys have somewhere else to be." The voice cut through the mockery like a knife through butter. Zelda looked up to see the cowboy from the general store standing a few feet away. His stance relaxed, but his tone carrying an edge of steel that suggested he was not making a request. "We are just having some fun, mister." "No harm meant," one of the ranch hands said, but his bravado had deflated considerably. "I suggest you find your fun elsewhere," the cowboy replied. He had not raised his voice, but something in his manner made the young men exchange glances and then drift away, muttering among themselves but not willing to push the confrontation further. Zelda gathered the last of her scattered purchases and stood, acutely aware of the cowboy's presence. She expected him to say something patronizing or offer unwanted pity. Instead, he simply picked up a spool of thread that had rolled near his boot and handed it to her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice tight with residual embarrassment. "Which way are you headed?" he asked. She pointed toward the edge of town. "About a mile that direction." "I am walking that way myself," he said, though Zelda suspected this was not entirely true. "Mind if I walk with you?" She minded very much, wanting nothing more than to disappear into privacy where she could lick her wounds, but something in his manner made refusal seem churlish. She nodded stiffly and started walking, her uneven gait feeling more pronounced than ever now that she had company. The cowboy fell into step beside her, but instead of maintaining the normal pace of an able-bodied person, he adjusted his stride to match hers exactly. He did not make a show of it or draw attention to what he was doing. He simply walked at her speed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They walked in silence for several minutes, leaving the main part of town behind. Zelda kept waiting for him to say something about her leg, to offer false comfort or ask what had happened to her, but he seemed content to simply walk. Finally, her curiosity overcame her reticence. "You do not have to slow down for me," she said. "I am not slowing down," he replied easily. "I am walking at exactly the pace I want to walk." "That is not true." He glanced at her, and she caught the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Who is to say what is true? Maybe I have been rushing around all my life and only now figured out the right speed for seeing what is actually around me. Despite herself, Zelda felt her defensive walls lower slightly. You are trying to be kind. I am being honest, he corrected. There is a difference. They walked a bit further, and Zelda found herself stealing glances at her companion. He was probably in his mid-20s, she guessed, which would make him only a few years older than her own 22 years. He had a strong profile and hands that looked capable of hard work, with calluses she could see even from where she walked beside him. There was a quality of self-possession about him that she found intriguing, as if he knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it to anyone. I am Clara Lawson, he said suddenly. Most people call me Cole. Zelda Owens, she replied, then added, most people call me that girl with the limp. She had not meant to say it out loud, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Cole did not react with the shock or pity she expected. He just nodded as if she had told him something ordinary. People are cruel when they are scared, he said. Scared of what? A woman who walks differently? Scared of anything that reminds them how fragile we all are, Cole said. You make them confront the fact that bad things can happen to anyone, and that terrifies them more than they want to admit. So they mock what scares them, trying to push it away. Zelda had never thought of it that way. She had always assumed people ridiculed her because they genuinely saw her as less than, as something broken and worthless. The idea that their cruelty stemmed from their own fear had never occurred to her. That does not make it hurt less, she said quietly. No, Cole agreed. It does not. But sometimes understanding why people do things helps carry the weight of it a little easier. They had reached the path that led off the main road toward her house. Zelda paused, unsure of the protocol. Did she invite him further, thank him and send him on his way? She had so little experience with men who treated her like a normal human being that she felt uncertain. Thank you for walking with me, she said finally, and for what you did back there with those men. No thanks needed, Cole said. He touched his hat brim again in that courteous gesture. I expect I will see you around town, Miss Owens. I expect so, she replied, surprised to find that the prospect did not displease her. She watched him walk back toward town, his long stride eating up the distance in a way she would never be able to match. Then she turned toward home, her package secure under her arm and her thoughts considerably more tangled than they had been when she left that morning. Her mother was at the sewing table when Zelda entered the house, her needle flashing in the light from the window as she worked on a dress alteration for one of the town's wealthier women. Martha Owens looked up with a smile that faded when she saw her daughter's expression. What happened? She asked immediately. Nothing, Zelda said, but she had never been able to lie convincingly to her mother. Zelda Marie Owens, I have known you since before you drew your first breath. Something happened. So Zelda told her about the ranch hands and the spilled packages, and the cowboy named Cole Lawson, who had walked beside her and matched her pace. Her mother listened with the careful attention she gave to everything Zelda shared, her hands never stopping their work but her eyes revealing that she heard every word. This Cole Lawson, Martha said when Zelda finished. Is he one of the ranch hands from the triple bar spread? I do not know where he works, Zelda admitted. He did not say. Well, he sounds like a decent man, and those are rarer than gold nuggets in these parts, her mother said. Did he seem interested in you, Mother? Zelda protested, heat rising in her cheeks again. I am just asking. You are a beautiful young woman, limp or no limp, and it is about time someone saw that. He was being polite, nothing more, Zelda said firmly, though a small part of her wondered if that was entirely true. There had been something in the way Cole looked at her, not with pity but with what seemed like genuine interest, that had felt different from any interaction she had experienced before. The next day, Zelda helped her mother with the sewing orders, her fingers working the needle with the practiced ease of years of repetition. They were finishing up a particularly intricate piece of embroidery when someone knocked on the door. Visitors were rare, and Zelda exchanged a curious glance with her mother before going to answer. Cole Lawson stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking slightly uncertain in a way that seemed at odds with the confidence he had displayed the day before. "Mr. Lawson," Zelda said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Miss Owens," he replied, "I hope I am not intruding. I was wondering if you might have time to take a walk with me. There is something I would like to show you if you are willing." Zelda's mind raced. This was highly irregular. Young, unmarried women did not go on unchaperoned walks with men they barely knew. But then again, everything about her life was irregular, and the rules that governed normal courtships had never seemed to apply to her anyway. "Let me get my bonnet," she said. Her mother appeared in the doorway behind her, sizing up Cole with the sharp assessment of a woman who had raised a daughter in a harsh world. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slightly. "Have her back before supper," Martha said. "Yes, madam," Cole replied respectfully. They set off down the path, Cole once again matching his pace to Zelda's without making any fuss about it. She waited for him to explain where they were going, but he seemed content to walk in companionable silence. The afternoon sun slanted through the ponderosa pines, casting dappled shadows across the rocky ground. Springerville sat at about 7,000 feet elevation, high enough that the summer heat was less oppressive than in the lower deserts, though still warm enough to make Zelda grateful for the shade when they found it. After about 15 minutes, Cole led her off the main path onto a smaller trail that wound through the trees. Zelda's curiosity grew with each step. Finally, the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing with a view that took her breath away. The land fell away in gentle slopes covered with golden grass and wildflowers, stretching toward distant mountains that rose purple and majestic against the deep blue sky. A small creek burbled nearby, its water catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. "I found this spot a few weeks ago," Cole said. "Thought you might appreciate it." "It is beautiful," Zelda breathed, moving closer to the edge of the clearing to take in the full panorama. "How did you find it?" "I have been working for a ranch about 5 miles north of here," Cole explained. "Riding fence lines mostly. You cover a lot of ground that way and stumble across places like this." They settled on a fallen log that provided a natural bench, and for a while, they simply sat in the peaceful quiet, watching hawks circle in the distance and listening to the sounds of the forest around them. Zelda felt something inside her relax in a way it rarely did in town, where every moment felt like a performance and every glance from strangers carried judgment. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said after a while. Zelda tensed, waiting for the inevitable question about her leg. "I suppose." "What do you want from life?" The question was so unexpected that Zelda found herself answering honestly before she could think better of it. "I want to be seen as more than my limp. I want to wake up without dreading the walk into town. I want to do work that matters and maybe, someday, have a family of my own, though I have accepted that might not be possible for someone like me." "Someone like you," Cole repeated softly. "You mean someone strong enough to face down cruelty every day and still keep going. Someone skilled enough to help support her family with her sewing. Someone brave enough to walk through a town that treats her poorly and not let it break her spirit." Zelda turned to look at him, startled by the intensity in his gray eyes. "That is not how people see me." "That is how I see you," Cole said simply. And I think my opinion counts for at least as much as those fools in town." Something shifted in Zelda's chest, a strange fluttering sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had spent so long believing herself unworthy of romantic attention that she had stopped even imagining what it might feel like to have someone look at her the way Cole was looking at her now, as if she were something precious and admirable rather than pitiable and broken. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving from her face to the distant mountains and back again. "My younger sister had a clubfoot," he said finally. "She was born that way, and the doctors said there was nothing to be done about it. She walked different, same as you, and people treated her terribly for it. Said she was cursed, that my parents must have sinned for God to punish them with a deformed child." "What happened to her?" Zelda asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. "She died when she was 12, Cole said, his voice roughening with old grief. "Fever took her one winter, but before that she taught me more about courage and strength than any able-bodied person I have ever known. She used to say that God made her walk different so she would learn to see things others missed, notice details that people rushing past would never catch." "I am sorry," Zelda said softly, reaching out to touch his hand where it rested on his knee. "That must have been very hard." "It was," Cole acknowledged, turning his hand to clasp hers gently. "But it taught me something important. It taught me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with how fast they can walk or how perfect their body is. It has everything to do with what is in their heart and how they treat the world around them." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, looking out over the beautiful landscape. Zelda felt something unfurling inside her, like a flower that had been closed tight against harsh weather finally daring to open its petals to the sun. She had spent 3 years wrapped in protective bitterness, using her anger as armor against the world's cruelty. But sitting here with Cole, she felt that armor beginning to crack, and underneath it was the person she used to be, the one who believed in possibilities and hoped for good things. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "Where are you from? What brought you to Arizona territory?" Cole smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Zelda's heart skip in her chest. "I am from Texas originally, near San Antonio. After my sister died and my parents passed a few years later, there was nothing keeping me there. I have been drifting mostly, taking ranch work where I can find it, seeing the country. I worked up in Colorado for a while, then New Mexico, and ended up here about 2 months ago." "You plan to stay?" Zelda asked, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. "I am starting to think I might," Cole said, his eyes finding hers again. "I am finding reasons to put down roots." The meaning in his words was clear, and Zelda felt her breath catch. This was happening too fast, she told herself. You could not possibly trust someone after only 2 conversations. But her heart was not listening to the logical part of her brain. Her heart was beating faster and urging her to lean into this feeling, to believe that maybe, just maybe, Cole Lawson was exactly who he seemed to be. They talked for another hour, sharing stories and learning about each other in the easy way of people who somehow fit together despite being strangers. Cole told her about the places he had seen, painting pictures with his words of Colorado mountains and New Mexico deserts, and the wild beauty of the frontier. Zelda told him about her life before the accident, when she had been engaged to a young man named Thomas, who had promptly broken off the engagement the moment it became clear her leg would not heal properly. "He said he could not marry damaged goods," Zelda said, the old hurt resurfacing. "Said his family expected him to marry someone whole, someone who could give him healthy children and be a proper wife." Then he was a fool and you are better off without him, Cole said fiercely. A person who only values you when you are convenient is not worth having in your life. That is easy to say, Zelda replied. Harder to believe when you are the one left behind. I imagine so, Cole acknowledged, but it does not make it any less true. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting the clouds with shades of orange and pink. Zelda realized with a start that they had been gone for hours, and her mother would be expecting her home soon. Reluctantly, she stood, brushing off her skirt. I should get back, she said. They made their way back through the trees, emerging onto the path that led to town. As they walked, Zelda found herself acutely aware of every point where her shoulder might brush against Cole's arm, every accidental touch of hands. She had forgotten what it felt like to be attracted to someone, to feel that electric awareness of another person's presence. It was both wonderful and terrifying. When they reached her house, Cole walked her to the door but made no move to leave immediately. He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, seeming to wrestle with something he wanted to say. "Miss Owens, Zelda," he said finally. "Would you do me the honor of allowing me to call on you proper? I know we have only just met, but I would very much like to get to know you better, if you are amenable to that." Zelda's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable hurt that would come when Cole realized what he was getting himself into. But then she remembered his sister, the girl who had walked differently and taught him about courage. She remembered the way he had matched her pace without making her feel lesser. She remembered the look in his eyes when he talked about putting down roots. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Cole's face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. I could come by around 2 if that suits you." 2 would be perfect, Zelda agreed. She watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared around a bend in the path. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the door frame and press a hand to her racing heart. Inside, she could hear her mother moving around, probably starting supper preparations. Zelda took a deep breath and went in, ready to face her mother's questions and her own swirling hopes. Martha took one look at her daughter's face and set down the pot she had been holding. "Tell me everything," she commanded. So Zelda did, spilling the whole story of the beautiful overlook and Cole's sister and his request to call on her properly. Her mother listened with the same careful attention as always, but this time her eyes were bright with something that looked like cautious joy. "You like him," Martha said. It was not a question. "I barely know him," Zelda protested weakly. "You like him," her mother repeated, "and he likes you. I could see that the moment he showed up at our door." "What if it does not work out?" Zelda asked, voicing the fear that lurked beneath her excitement. "What if he decides I am too much trouble, that he does not want to be tied to someone who cannot even walk normally?" "Then he will not deserve you," Martha said firmly. "But I do not think that is going to happen. That young man looked at you the way your father used to look at me, like you were the most fascinating person in the world. That is not something you can fake." Over the next several weeks, Cole became a regular fixture in Zelda's life. He came by almost every afternoon, sometimes taking her on walks to different spots he had discovered in the surrounding countryside. Sometimes simply sitting with her and her mother in their small parlor while Zelda sewed and they all talked. He never once complained about adjusting his pace to match hers, never showed impatience or frustration with the limitations her leg imposed. He simply accepted her exactly as she was. The people of Springerville noticed, of course. In a town that small, nothing went unobserved. Zelda heard the whispers, saw the speculative looks and raised eyebrows. Some people seemed genuinely happy for her, like Mr. Peterson at the general store, who always had a kind word when she came in. Others were less charitable, like Abigail Henderson and her circle, who made pointed comments about how desperate a man must be to court a cripple. Zelda tried not to let it bother her, but some days the weight of judgment felt heavier than others. She was mending a tear in one of Cole's shirts. He had started bringing her his repair work and paying her for it when she mentioned the gossip to him. "They say you must be after my mother's property," she said, keeping her eyes on her needle. "That no man would court me unless he had ulterior motives." Cole was silent for a moment, and when Zelda looked up, she saw anger flashing in his gray eyes. "What property? You rent this house, do you not?" "We own it, actually," Zelda said. "My father bought it years ago. It is not much, but it is paid for, and we have about 40 acres of land that came with it, though most of it is too rocky for much besides grazing." 40 acres of rocky land, Cole repeated. "Yes, clearly I am scheming to get my hands on that fortune." Despite herself, Zelda laughed at the absurdity in his tone. "I know it is ridiculous, but people will talk." "Let them," Cole said. He moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hand in both of his. "Zelda, I need you to understand something. I have worked ranches across 3 territories. I have saved most of my wages because there was nothing I wanted to spend them on. If I wanted property, I could buy my own. I am not here because of what you have. I am here because of who you are." "Who am I?" Zelda asked softly, searching his face. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Cole said. "You are talented and kind, and you have a way of seeing beauty in things that others overlook. You make me want to be better, to deserve the time you give me, and I am falling in love with you more every single day." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and wonderful and terrifying. Zelda felt tears prickling at her eyes, but for once they were not tears of frustration or pain. They were tears of overwhelming emotion, of hope breaking through years of resignation. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it scares me to death." "It scares me too," Cole admitted, "but I think the best things in life are usually a little frightening." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Zelda did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home to a place she had never known she was searching for. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Zelda saw her mother standing in the doorway to the kitchen, a knowing smile on her face. Martha had the decency to duck back out of sight, but Zelda felt her cheeks heat anyway. "I should probably ask your mother's permission to court you formally," Cole said, though he had not released her hand. "I think she will say yes," Zelda replied, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Cole did ask Martha's permission that very evening, and as Zelda had predicted, her mother agreed readily. She did, however, insist on having a serious conversation with Cole about his intentions, which resulted in him being closeted in the kitchen with Martha for almost an hour while Zelda paced nervously in the parlor. When they finally emerged, both looked satisfied with whatever had been discussed. "He will do," Martha said simply, which was high praise coming from her. As summer deepened into fall, Cole and Zelda's courtship progressed in the traditional way, though nothing about their relationship felt traditional to Zelda. Cole took her to the church social, where they danced together despite Zelda's protests that she could not possibly dance with her bad leg. Cole had simply held her close and swayed gently to the music, creating their own rhythm that had nothing to do with the fiddle playing in the corner. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his rides and shared his wages with her and Martha when their sewing work was slow. He talked about his dreams of maybe buying his own small ranch someday, somewhere they could raise horses and build a life together. The people of Springerville slowly adjusted to seeing them together. Some never stopped gossiping and speculating, but others seemed to soften their views. Children who had once pointed and laughed learned from their parents changing attitudes that maybe the limping lady was not such a strange sight after all. Abigail Henderson remained stubbornly disapproving, but Zelda found she cared less and less what Abigail thought with each passing week. It was early October when Cole proposed. He had been unusually quiet all afternoon, almost nervous, which was so unlike him that Zelda had asked twice if something was wrong. He had assured her everything was fine and suggested they take a walk to their overlook, the place he had first brought her all those months ago. The aspens had turned golden, and the air carried the crisp bite of autumn. They sat on their usual log, looking out over the valley painted in shades of amber and rust. Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond set in the center. "This was my mother's," he said. "It is not much, but it is the only valuable thing I own besides my horse and my saddle. Zelda Owens, I know we have not been courting very long by traditional standards, but I am certain of what I feel. You are my best friend and the love of my life. Would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife?" Zelda looked at the ring, then at Cole's earnest face, then back at the ring. Her heart was so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that still trembled slightly. And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to narrow down to just this moment, this perfect crystallization of joy. They set the wedding date for late November, giving themselves time to make proper arrangements, but not so long that they had to wait forever. Martha threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, sewing Zelda a wedding dress of cream-colored silk that they had splurged on from a catalog. Cole worked extra hours to save money for a small house he had found for sale on the edge of town. A 2-room cabin that needed work, but had good bones and a nice piece of land attached. The wedding took place on a cool November morning in the small church at the center of Springerville. Most of the town turned out, some out of genuine goodwill and others out of curiosity, to see the crippled girl marry the cowboy who had inexplicably fallen for her. Zelda did not care about their motivations. She walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, her uneven gait steady and sure, her eyes locked on Cole waiting for her at the altar in his best suit with a look on his face like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a tense moment of silence, but no one spoke up. Cole's voice was strong and clear when he said his vows, promising to love and cherish Zelda in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. Zelda's voice shook only slightly when she made the same promises, meaning every word with her whole heart. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such tenderness that Zelda heard several women in the congregation sigh audibly. They walked back down the aisle together, Cole matching her pace exactly as he always did, and emerged into the autumn sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by various townspeople and dancing that went on until late in the evening. Zelda found herself swept up in congratulations and well wishes from people who had ignored her or mocked her for years. She accepted their words with grace, though privately she thought it ironic how quickly people changed their tune once you had a wedding ring on your finger. Cole danced with her again, holding her close and creating their own rhythm just as he had at the church social months before. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zelda replied honestly. They spent their wedding night in their little cabin, which Cole had been secretly fixing up for weeks with help from some of the ranch hands he worked with. He had repaired the roof and chinked the gaps in the walls and even built a proper bed frame with his own hands. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warming the space and casting dancing shadows on the walls. Cole carried Zelda over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. And then they were alone together for the first time as husband and wife. What followed was tentative and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but underneath it all was a profound sense of rightness. Cole was patient and gentle, treating Zelda's body with the same respect and care he had always shown her. When she expressed uncertainty about her leg, about whether it would make things difficult, he kissed her and told her she was perfect exactly as she was. And in that moment, wrapped in her husband's arms with the firelight painting everything golden, Zelda believed him. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, as it always seemed to be on the frontier. Cole continued working for the ranch while also trying to improve their property and start a small horse breeding operation. Zelda took in more sewing work and also began selling preserves and baked goods to supplement their income. Her leg ached more than usual during the winter months when the cold settled deep into her bones, and there were days when she felt frustrated by her limitations. But through it all, Cole was steadfast. On the days when Zelda's leg hurt too much to walk comfortably, he brought her work to her so she could sit and rest. When she felt discouraged by how long everything took her compared to how it might be for someone without her injury, he reminded her of all the things she accomplished despite the obstacles. And always, he matched his pace to hers, never rushing ahead or showing impatience with the speed at which she moved through the world. They fell into comfortable routines together. Cole would wake before dawn to tend the horses and do his ranch work, returning in late afternoon dusty and tired but always with a smile for his wife. Zelda would have supper waiting, simple fare of beans and cornbread and whatever vegetables they had managed to grow in their small garden. After eating, they would sit together on their porch if the weather permitted, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about their day. On Sundays, they attended church together, and Zelda grew accustomed to walking into the building on Cole's arm, her head held high despite the lingering stairs. It was on one of those Sunday mornings, in the spring of their second year of marriage, that Zelda realized her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another week passed and then another, she allowed herself to consider the possibility. When she finally worked up the courage to mention it to her mother, Martha's face lit up with joy. "A baby," Martha breathed. "Oh, Zelda, that is wonderful news." "I have not told Cole yet," Zelda said. "I wanted to be more certain first. And Mother, I am scared. What if something goes wrong? What if my leg somehow affects the baby?" "Your leg has nothing to do with your ability to carry a child," Martha said firmly. "And Dr. Whitmore will take good care of you. You are young and healthy, and you have a husband who adores you. This is good news, sweetheart. Let yourself be happy about it." That evening, after supper, Zelda took Cole's hand and led him outside to their favorite spot beneath an old cottonwood tree. The spring air was soft and warm, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart hammering in her chest. Cole looked at her with those steady gray eyes that always seemed to see right through to her soul. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Zelda said. "We are going to have a baby, in about 7 months if I have calculated correctly." For a moment, Cole just stared at her as if he had not quite processed the words. Then a grin spread across his face. so wide and genuine that it made Zelda's eyes fill with happy tears. He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down, suddenly concerned he might have hurt her or the baby. "Sorry, I should not have done that," he said quickly. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" "We are both fine," Zelda assured him, laughing through her tears. "You cannot break us that easily." Cole placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "A baby. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though his face made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Cole said. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "This is everything I ever wanted. A home, a wife I love more than anything, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in the whole territory." "Even though your wife limps?" Zelda asked, the old insecurity rising despite all the healing she had done. "Especially because of who you are, Limp included," Cole corrected gently. "That is what makes you who you are, Zelda. All of it. The hard parts and the beautiful parts and everything in between. I would not change a single thing about you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Zelda's leg did ache more as her belly grew and her balance shifted. Dr. Whitmore, the town physician, examined her regularly and pronounced her and the baby healthy. Cole became even more protective, insisting on helping with tasks that Zelda had always done herself and hovering anxiously whenever she seemed tired. It was endearing if occasionally exasperating. Their baby, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and an impressive set of lungs, was born on a cold November night. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda wondered if she would survive it. But Martha was there, coaching her through each contraction, and Cole refused to leave her side despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Zelda felt a surge of love so powerful it eclipsed everything else she had ever felt. "He is perfect," Cole breathed, cradling his son with a tenderness that made Zelda's heart swell even larger. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Charles Martin Lawson, after Cole's father and Zelda's father respectively, but they called him Charlie from the start. He was a hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours, but Zelda found she did not mind the exhaustion. Every time she looked at her son's tiny face, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she had built. The next few years passed in a blur of child rearing and hard work. Cole's horse breeding business slowly began to turn a profit, and they were able to add on to their cabin, creating a proper bedroom for Charlie and a larger kitchen for Zelda. Her sewing business continued to grow as well, with women from neighboring towns sending her orders after hearing about her skill with a needle. Money was still tight, but they were making it work. Charlie grew into a curious, energetic toddler who kept them both constantly on their toes. He showed no sign of being bothered by his mother's limp, accepting it as just part of who she was. When he started walking himself, he would sometimes imitate her uneven gait in the way children do, not out of mockery but simply because that was how his mama walked. Zelda found it oddly touching. When Charlie was 3, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less trepidation and more excitement. They knew what to expect now, and while they also knew how difficult parenthood could be, they felt ready to expand their family. Their second child, a daughter they named Zara Elizabeth, arrived on a warm June evening. She had Zelda's dark hair and delicate features, and from the moment she entered the world, she seemed to observe everything with solemn, intelligent eyes. Charlie was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feedings. Cole joked that they now had their hands full with 2, and Zelda laughingly agreed. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt cozy and crowded in the best possible way. Cole had become known as one of the best horse trainers in the region, and people came from miles around to buy his stock or have him work with their difficult animals. Zelda's reputation as a seamstress had spread even further, and she often had to turn down work because she had more orders than she could handle. On Sundays, they would sometimes picnic at the overlook where Cole had first brought Zelda all those years ago. Charlie would run around exploring while Zara sat on a blanket, and Cole and Zelda would watch their children with the contentment of people who knew how lucky they were. Zelda's leg still bothered her sometimes, especially after a long day, but it had become just another part of her life rather than the defining feature of her existence. It was during one of these Sunday picnics, when Charlie was 7 and Zara was 4, that Charlie asked the question Zelda had been waiting for since he was old enough to notice such things. "Mama, why do you walk different than other people?" He asked with the straightforward curiosity of childhood. Zelda exchanged a glance with Cole, who gave her an encouraging nod. She had thought about how to answer this question many times over the years. "When I was younger, before you were born, I had an accident," she explained. "A wagon wheel ran over my leg and it did not heal the way it should have. So now it is a little shorter and weaker than my other leg, which is why I limp when I walk." "Does it hurt?" Charlie asked, his young face creased with concern. "Sometimes," Zelda admitted. "But I have learned to live with it. It is just part of who I am now." "I think you walk just fine," Charlie declared loyally, "and Papa always walks with you, so it does not matter if you are slow." "That is right," Cole said, ruffling his son's hair. "Your mama and I walk together, and that is what matters." Zara, who had been playing with a flower, looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Some people are mean about it," she said, with the blunt honesty of a young child. "I heard Mrs. Henderson say you were a cripple." Zelda felt her chest tighten at the old slur, but before she could respond, Cole spoke up. "There are always going to be people who say unkind things," he told his children. "People who judge others by what they look like on the outside rather than who they are on the inside. Your mama is one of the strongest, bravest, most capable people I have ever known. The fact that she walks with a limp does not change that, and anyone who thinks otherwise is not worth your time or attention." "I think Mama is strong too," Charlie said staunchly. "Me too," Zara echoed, climbing into Zelda's lap and wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. Zelda held her daughter close, blinking back tears. She thought about the girl she had been 7 years ago, walking through Springerville with her head down and her shoulders hunched, expecting cruelty at every turn. She thought about how Cole had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to pray. And she thought about the life they had built together, this beautiful, messy, imperfect life full of love and laughter and meaning. "Thank you," she whispered to Cole over Zara's head. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes were bright with understanding. "For matching my pace," Zelda said simply. "For seeing me when no one else did. For giving me this life." Cole reached over and took her free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You gave me this life too. We built it together, step by step, and I would not change a single moment of it." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep when Zelda was 35, leaving a hole in their family that took time to heal. But they had each other, and their children, and the solid foundation of love they had built. Charlie grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's way with horses, while Zara showed promise as an artist, filling the cabin walls with her drawings and paintings. By the time Zelda reached her 40th birthday, she and Cole had been married for nearly 18 years. They were no longer the young couple who had shocked the town by daring to love each other despite what others thought. They were simply the Lawsons, respected members of the community, known for their kindness and their work ethic, and the way they had built something lasting together. Zelda's limp had not improved over the years, and in fact had grown slightly more pronounced as arthritis set into the old injury. But it mattered less than ever. She had long since stopped caring what strangers thought of her gait. She had a husband who loved her deeply, children who looked at her with admiration rather than pity, and a place in the community she had earned through years of patience and quiet dignity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Cole took her back to the Overlook, where they had spent so many important moments. The children were old enough to be left at home for an afternoon, though Charlie at 17 was hardly a child anymore, and Zara at 14 was rapidly becoming a young woman herself. They sat on their log, now worn smooth by 2 decades of use, and looked out over the familiar vista. The mountains remained unchanging while everything else in their lives had transformed. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Cole asked, his arm around Zelda's shoulders. "Of course," Zelda said. "I was terrified and hopeful and had no idea what to make of you." "I knew that day," Cole said. "I knew I was going to marry you if you would have me." "You did not," Zelda protested with a laugh. "We had only just met." "I did," Cole insisted. "Something just clicked into place when I saw you in that general store. And then when those boys were hassling you and you kept your head up and kept walking, I thought, there is someone worth knowing, someone special." "Even with the limp," Zelda said, though it was no longer a question after all these years. "Especially with everything that makes you who you are," Cole corrected, as he always did. "You know, my sister used to say that God gives some people special challenges so they can learn to be extraordinary. I think she was right." "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known, Zelda Lawson." Zelda leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for walking beside me all these years." "Always," Cole promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always and forever, at whatever pace we need to go." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together step by careful step, who had proven that love was not about perfection, but about showing up for each other day after day, no matter what challenges life presented. In the distance, Zelda could see the town of Springerville, larger now than it had been when she first met Cole, but still recognizable. The people who had once mocked her were older now, some of them gone, others softened by the passage of time and the example the Lawsons had set. Their children attended school with Charlie and Zara, and none of them thought twice about the fact that Mrs. Lawson walked with a limp. It was just part of who she was, as unremarkable and ordinary as the color of her hair or the sound of her laugh. That evening, when they returned home, they found their children had prepared a special anniversary supper. Charlie had caught fresh trout from the creek, and Zara had baked a cake with frosting that was slightly lopsided but made with love. They sat around the table together, this family they had created, and shared stories and laughter until the candles burned low. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Cole and Zelda stood together on their porch, looking up at the stars that blazed in the clear mountain sky. Cole's arm was around her waist, and Zelda leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Lawson," Cole murmured. "Happy anniversary," Zelda replied, tilting her face up for a kiss that was as sweet and full of promise as their first one had been 20 years before. The years that followed brought continued blessings to the Lawson family. Charlie married a kind young woman named Sarah who had grown up on a neighboring ranch, and they gave Cole and Zelda their first grandchild, a boy named Thomas, when Zelda was 44. Holding her grandson for the first time, Zelda thought about all the years she had believed she would never have this, never know the joy of family and belonging. The miracle of it all still overwhelmed her sometimes. Zara showed no signs of settling down quickly, too absorbed in her art and her dreams of maybe studying at a real school back east. Cole and Zelda supported her ambitions, even though the thought of their daughter leaving Arizona territory left a hollow feeling in Zelda's chest. They had raised their children to be independent and to chase their dreams, and now they had to trust that those lessons would serve them well. The horse breeding business had grown more successful than they had ever imagined. Cole's reputation had spread throughout the territory and beyond, and they regularly had buyers coming from as far away as Texas and California to purchase their stock. They had been able to hire help, taking some of the burden of daily labor off Cole's aging shoulders. At 45, he still moved with the easy grace of a cowboy, but Zelda noticed the way he winced sometimes when he thought she was not looking, the price of decades of hard physical work. Her own leg had grown more troublesome with age. Some mornings she could barely put weight on it, the pain sharp enough to take her breath away. But she had learned to work around the bad days, to ask for help when she needed it, and to be grateful for the good days when the pain was manageable. Cole had built her a proper sewing room with a comfortable chair and good light, and she spent many hours there working on the intricate pieces that had become her specialty. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the church hall, inviting what seemed like half the territory. Zelda walked into the decorated hall on Cole's arm, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people gathered to celebrate their marriage. There were old friends and new, family and neighbors, ranch hands Cole had worked with over the years and customers who had become friends. Pastor Williams, who had married them all those years ago, raised his glass in a toast. 25 years ago, I stood before Cole Lawson and Zelda Owens and witnessed them make promises to each other. I will confess, there were some in this town who doubted that marriage would last, who thought Cole was making a mistake. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. I am happy to say that those doubters were proven spectacularly wrong. The Lawsons have shown us all what real love looks like, the kind that does not falter when things get difficult, the kind that grows stronger with each passing year. To Cole and Zelda, may you have many more years of happiness together. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Zelda felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, the kind she had shed often over the past 25 years. Cole squeezed her hand, and when she looked up at him, she saw his eyes were suspiciously bright as well. They danced that night, as they always did at gatherings, moving to their own rhythm while others spun and twirled around them. Zelda's leg ached, but she ignored it, too caught up in the joy of the moment to care. Cole held her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked softly. "I am thinking about that day in the general store," Zelda said. "When you first walked beside me and matched my pace, I am thinking about how one moment of kindness from a stranger changed my entire life." "It changed mine too," Cole said. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. You gave me everything that matters." They swayed together, lost in their own world while the celebration continued around them. Zelda thought about all the moments that had brought them to this place, the challenges they had overcome, and the joys they had shared. She thought about the girl she had been, bitter and closed off, convinced that happiness was not meant for someone like her. And she thought about the woman she had become, loved and valued and surrounded by family. As the evening wore on and the party began to wind down, Zelda found herself standing outside getting some fresh air. Zara joined her, now 21 and beautiful in the way of young women standing on the threshold of their lives. "That was a lovely party," Zelda said, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You and Papa deserve it," Zara replied. "You have the kind of marriage people dream about." It was not always easy, Zelda felt compelled to say. "There were hard times, days when we struggled to make ends meet or when my leg hurt so much I could barely function. Marriage is work, sweetheart. Beautiful work, but work nonetheless." "But you had each other," Zara said. "That is what made the difference, is it not? Having someone who walks beside you no matter what." "Yes," Zelda agreed softly. "That makes all the difference." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheeling overhead. Inside, they could hear Cole's laugh, a sound that still made Zelda's heart skip even after all these years. She thought about how far they had come together, how much they had built, and how very blessed she was to have found someone who loved her not in spite of her imperfections, but because of the whole person she was. The years continued their steady march forward. Charlie and Sarah had 2 more children, giving Cole and Zelda a total of 3 grandchildren who filled their lives with chaos and joy. Zara did eventually go east to study art, but she came home regularly, unable to stay away from the landscape and the family she loved. The horse business remained successful, allowing them to live comfortably if not lavishly. When Zelda turned 50, Cole threw her a surprise party with all their friends and family. She was shocked to realize how many people had shown up, how many lives she had touched over the years through her kindness and her work. Women whose wedding dresses she had sewn, children she had taught Sunday school to, neighbors she had helped during difficult times. They had all come to celebrate her, and Zelda found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. "You have built a good life, my love," Cole told her that night as they prepared for bed. "You should be proud of everything you have accomplished." "We built it together," Zelda corrected, using the same words he had spoken to her so many times over the years. "Every step of the way together." They were in their 60s when Cole's health began to fail. It started with a persistent cough that would not go away, then progressed to shortness of breath and fatigue. Dr. Whitmore, now elderly himself, examined Cole and delivered the news they had both been dreading. His lungs were damaged, probably from years of dust and hard work, and there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Zelda refused to accept it at first. Cole was the strong one, the one who took care of everyone else. He could not be the one who needed care. But as the months passed and Cole grew weaker, she accepted the reality of their situation and devoted herself to making whatever time they had left together as good as possible. Their children rallied around them. Charlie took over the daily running of the horse business, allowing Cole to rest. Zara came home from the east and did not leave again, setting up a studio in the barn where she could work while still being close to her parents. Their grandchildren, ranging in age from 18 down to 7, visited constantly, filling the house with noise and life. On good days, Cole could still sit on the porch and watch the world go by. Zelda would sit beside him, her hand in his, and they would talk about everything and nothing. They reminisced about their early days together, laughed about the challenges they had overcome, and spoke with satisfaction about the family they had created and the legacy they would leave behind. "I do not want you to be alone," Cole said one afternoon when they were by themselves. Promise me you will not isolate yourself after I am gone." "Do not talk like that," Zelda protested, though they both knew the end was approaching. "We have to talk about it," Cole said gently. "I need to know you will be all right." "I will never be all right without you," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "You are my heart, Cole Lawson. How am I supposed to keep going when half of me is missing?" "Because you are the strongest person I know," Cole said, echoing words he had spoken to her 40 years earlier. "Because our children and grandchildren need you. Because there is still life to be lived and beauty to be found, even in the grief." "I do not want to do it without you," Zelda whispered. "I know," Cole said, pulling her close despite his weakness. "But you will. And you will be magnificent, just like you have always been." Cole passed away on a cold December morning with his family gathered around him. He slipped away peacefully, Zelda's hand clasped in his, surrounded by the love he had spent his life creating. His last words were to her, too soft for anyone else to hear, but Zelda would carry them in her heart forever. "Thank you for walking beside me," he whispered. "Best journey of my life." The grief was overwhelming at first. Zelda felt like she could not breathe, could not think, could not function without Cole's steady presence beside her. She moved through the funeral arrangements in a daze, accepting condolences from what seemed like the entire territory. Everyone had a story about Cole, about his kindness, or his skill with horses, or the way he had always treated people with dignity and respect. At the service, Pastor William spoke about the love Cole and Zelda had shared, how it had been an example to everyone who knew them. "Cole Lawson lived his values every single day," the pastor said. "He saw worth in people that others overlooked. He gave second chances and matched his pace to those who needed someone to walk alongside them. And in doing so, he showed us all what it means to love the way God intended us to love." In the months that followed, Zelda learned to navigate grief while still living. Her children and grandchildren checked on her constantly, probably more than was strictly necessary, but she did not mind. She found comfort in their presence, in the tangible proof of the life she and Cole had built together. She continued her sewing work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. And slowly, gradually, she learned to carry the grief alongside the joy, to remember Cole with smiles as well as tears. She thought often about what he had said, about there still being life to be lived and beauty to be found. She forced herself to keep participating in community events, to maintain friendships, to show up for her family's important moments. It was hard, especially on the days when her leg hurt and her heart hurt, and she wanted nothing more than to curl up and give in to the sadness. But she kept going, kept walking forward because that was what Cole would have wanted. 2 years after Cole's death, Zara got married to a young architect who had come west seeking opportunities. The wedding was bittersweet, full of joy for Zara but shadowed by Cole's absence. As Zelda watched her daughter walk down the aisle, she felt Cole's presence so strongly it almost took her breath away. He would have been so proud, she thought. So very proud of the woman their daughter had become. Charlie's oldest son, Thomas, now 22, came to Zelda one afternoon with a request. "Grandma, I am thinking about asking Emma Wilson to marry me, but I wanted your advice first." Zelda looked at her grandson, seeing so much of Cole in his earnest gray eyes and his careful consideration. "What kind of advice are you looking for?" "I want what you and Grandpa had," Thomas said simply. "That kind of love that lasts, that grows stronger instead of weaker over time. How do I build that?" Zelda took her grandson's hand, thinking about all the years and all the lessons she and Cole had learned together. "You build it by showing up," she said. "Every single day, even when it is hard. You build it by matching your partner's pace, by accepting them exactly as they are instead of trying to change them. You build it through respect and kindness, and choosing each other over and over again, even when the initial excitement fades and you are left with the everyday reality of life together. That is what Grandpa did for you, Thomas said. Everyone knows the story of how he walked beside you when others mocked you. He did, Zelda confirmed. But I did the same for him, Thomas. Love is not about grand gestures or one person sacrificing for the other. It is about two people deciding to walk through life together, supporting each other through whatever comes. Your grandfather had his own struggles and challenges, and I walked beside him through those just as he walked beside me through mine. Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Do you think Emma and I can have that? If you are both willing to do the work, absolutely, Zelda said. But remember, it is work. Beautiful, rewarding, worthwhile work, but work nonetheless. Some days you will want to give up. Some days you will wonder if you made the right choice. But if you keep choosing each other, keep showing up, keep matching each other's pace, then yes, you can build something that lasts. Thomas did propose to Emma, and they were married the following spring. Zelda watched another generation begin their journey together, and she felt both the ache of Cole's absence and the warmth of knowing that the love they had shared continued to influence their family long after his death. Zelda lived for another 10 years after Cole passed, long enough to see 4 of her grandchildren married and to meet several great-grandchildren. Her leg grew more troublesome with each passing year, until she needed a cane to walk even short distances. But she faced that challenge the same way she had faced every other obstacle in her life, with courage and determination, and the support of the family she and Cole had created. On a warm afternoon in late summer, when Zelda was 73 years old, she asked Charlie to take her to the Overlook one last time. Her grandson Thomas drove them in his automobile, one of the new contraptions that were slowly becoming more common even in rural Arizona, and helped her climb the familiar path to the clearing where she and Cole had spent so many meaningful moments. Zelda sat on the old log, now weathered and worn but still solid, and looked out over the view she had loved for 50 years. The mountains remained unchanging, eternal witnesses to all the small human dramas that played out beneath them. She thought about the frightened, bitter girl she had been when Cole first brought her here, and the woman she had become through the love they shared and the life they built together. "Tell me about Grandpa," Thomas said, sitting beside her. So Zelda did. She told him about the day they met, about Cole's kindness and steadiness, and the way he had matched her pace without making her feel lesser. She told him about their courtship and their wedding and the early years of their marriage when they had been poor but happy. She told him about watching their children grow up and building a business together, and learning what it meant to truly partner with someone through all the seasons of life. He was not perfect, Zelda said. No one is. He could be stubborn sometimes, and he worried too much about things he could not control. But he loved fiercely and loyally, and he never once made me feel like my limitations were a burden to him. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one else ever had, and that made all the difference. "I hope I can be that kind of husband to Emma," Thomas said quietly. "You can," Zelda assured him. "You already are. I see the way you look at her, the way you support her dreams even when they are different from your own. That is what your grandfather taught you without even realizing it. Love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours, whose pace matches yours, whose journey you want to share." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Zelda felt tired in a way that went beyond mere physical exhaustion, a weariness that seemed to have settled into her very bones. But she also felt at peace, content with the life she had lived and the legacy she would leave behind. "Thomas," she said after a while, "when my time comes, I want you to know that I died happy. Your grandfather gave me the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. He gave me love and acceptance and a life full of meaning. Whatever happens next, I am ready." "Grandma," Thomas protested, but she shook her head. "I am 73 years old, and I have lived a full, beautiful life. I have been loved, and I have loved in return. I have raised children and seen them raise children of their own. I have built something lasting. When I think about that frightened girl walking through Springerville with her head down, and then I look at everything that came after, I am overwhelmed with gratitude. Cole gave me all of that by simply choosing to walk beside me." Zelda Owens Lawson passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, surrounded by family in the house she and Cole had shared for more than 50 years. At her funeral, the church was filled to overflowing with people whose lives she had touched, whose garments she had sewn, whose children she had taught, whose sorrows she had eased with her quiet kindness. Pastor Williams, now ancient but still presiding over the church he had served for decades, spoke about Zelda's life with deep affection. "Zelda Lawson could have let bitterness consume her," he said. "She had every reason to withdraw from a world that had treated her cruelly because of something beyond her control. But instead, she chose courage. She chose to keep walking, even when every step was painful. And when Cole Lawson chose to walk beside her, matching her pace, they showed all of us what real love looks like." Thomas stood to deliver a eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the grandmother who had taught him so much about perseverance and grace. "My grandmother's limp defined her to the people of this town when she was young," he said. "But it never defined her to my grandfather, and eventually it did not define her to any of us. She was so much more than that one physical characteristic. She was talented and kind and strong and brave. She built a life that mattered and she loved people well, and in the end, that is all any of us can hope to do." They buried her next to Cole under the cottonwood tree they had loved, with a simple headstone that read, "Zelda Owens Lawson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she walked with grace." Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would hear the story of Cole and Zelda, the cowboy and the woman with the limp who had fallen in love against all odds. The story would be passed down through generations, becoming part of the family's history and identity. And the lesson Cole had taught that day in Springerville, when he chose to walk beside someone who needed a companion rather than rushing past, would continue to resonate through the years. The old log at the overlook eventually rotted away, but the family erected a bench in its place with a plaque that read, "In memory of Cole and Zelda Lawson, they walked together." It became a place where family members went when they needed to think or when they faced difficult decisions. They would sit on that bench, look out over those timeless mountains, and remember the love story that had started it all. And in Springerville, Arizona, now a thriving small city barely recognizable from the frontier town, it had once been. People still sometimes told the story of Cole Lawson, the cowboy who had matched his pace to Zelda's and built a love that lasted a lifetime. It became a local legend, a reminder that kindness and acceptance and choosing to walk beside someone, no matter how slow their pace might be, could change not just individual lives but echo through generations. The cruelty that Zelda had faced in her youth became a cautionary tale, while the love she and Cole had shared became an aspiration. And though the world changed dramatically over the decades and centuries that followed, the fundamental truth of their story remained constant. That real love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose journey you want to share, and then matching your pace to theirs, step by step, for all the days of your life.